USS Monitor was an iron-hulled steamship. Built during the American Civil War, she was the first ironclad warship commissioned by the Union Navy. Monitor is most famous for her central role in the Battle of Hampton Roads on the 9th of March 1862, where, under the command of Lieutenant John Worden, she fought the casemate ironclad CSS Virginia to a standstill. The unique design of the ship, distinguished by its revolving turret which was designed by American inventor Theodore Timby, was quickly duplicated and established the Monitor type of warship. The remainder of the ship was designed by the Swedish-born engineer and inventor John Ericsson and hurriedly built in Brooklyn in only 101 days. Monitor presented a new concept in ship design and employed a variety of new inventions and innovations in shipbuilding that caught the attention of the world. The impetus to build Monitor was prompted by the news that the Confederates were building an ironclad warship named Virginia that could effectively engage the Union ships blockading Hampton Roads and the James River, leading to Richmond and ultimately advance on Washington, D.C. and other cities virtually unchallenged. Before Monitor could reach Hampton Roads, the Confederate ironclad had destroyed the sail frigates USS Cumberland and USS Congress and had run the steam frigate USS Minnesota aground. That night Monitor arrived, and the following morning, just before Virginia was about to finish off Minnesota, the new Union ironclad confronted the Confederate ship, preventing her from wreaking further destruction on the wooden Union ships. A 4-hour battle ensued, both ships pounding the other with close-range cannon fire, although neither ship could destroy or seriously damage the other. This was the first ever battle fought between two armored warships and marked a turning point in naval warfare, after the Confederates were forced to destroy Virginia as they withdrew in early May. Monitor sailed up the James River to support the Union Army during the Peninsula Campaign. The ship participated in the Battle of Drewry's Bluff later that month and remained in the area giving support to General McClellan's forces on land, until she was ordered to join the blockaders off North Carolina in December. On her way she foundered while under tow during a storm off Cape Hatteras on the last day of the year. Monitor's wreck was discovered in 1973 and has been partially salvaged. Her guns, gun turret, engine and other relics are on display at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia. Conception. While the concept of ships protected by armor existed before the advent of the ironclad Monitor, the need for wide plating on ships only arose after the shell-firing cannon was introduced to naval warfare in the 1820s. The use of heavy iron plating on the sides of warships was not practical until steam propulsion matured enough to carry its great weight. Developments in gun technology had progressed by the 1840s so that no practical thickness of wood could withstand the power of a shell. In response, the United States began construction in 1854 of a steam-powered ironclad warship, the Stevens Battery. But work was delayed and the designer, Robert Stevens, died in 1856, stalling further work. Since there was no pressing need for such a ship at the time, there was little demand to continue work on the unfinished vessel. It was France that introduced the first operational armored ships as well as the first shell guns and rifled cannons. Experience during the Crimean War of 1854–55 showed that armored ships could withstand repeated hits without significant damage when French ironclad floating batteries defeated Russian coastal fortifications during the Battle of Kinburn. Ericsson claimed to have sent the French Emperor Napoleon III a proposal for a Monitor-type design, with a gun turret, in September 1854, but no record of any such submission could be found in the archives archives of the French Ministry of the Navy when they were searched by naval historian James Finney Baxter III. The French followed those ships with the first ocean-going ironclad, the armoured frigate Gloire, in 1859, and the British responded with HMS Warrior. The Union Navy's attitude towards ironclads changed quickly when it was learned that the Confederates were converting the captured US Merrimac II, an ironclad at the naval shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia. Subsequently, the urgency of Monitor's completion and deployment to Hampton Roads was driven by fears of what the Confederate ironclad, now renamed Virginia, would be capable of doing, not only to Union ships but to cities along the coast and river fronts. Northern newspapers published daily accounts of the Confederates' progress in converting the Merrimac to an ironclad. This prompted the Union Navy to complete and deploy Monitor as soon as possible. Word of Merrimac's reconstruction and conversion was confirmed in the North in late February 1862 when Mary Lou Vest of Norfolk, a freed slave who worked as a housekeeper for one of the Confederate engineers working on Merrimac, made her way through Confederate lines with news that the Confederates were building an ironclad warship. Concealed in her dress was a message from a Union sympathizer who worked in the Navy Yard warning that the former Merrimac, renamed Virginia by the Confederates, was nearing completion. Upon her arrival in Washington, Mary managed to meet with Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles and informed him that the Confederates were nearing the completion of their ironclad, which surprised Welles. Convinced by the papers Mary was carrying, he had production of Monitor sped up. Welles later recorded in his memoirs that Mrs. Lou Vest encountered no small risk in bringing this information. Approval. After the United States received word of the construction of Virginia, Congress appropriated $1.5 million on 3 August 1861 to build one or more armored steamships. It also ordered the creation of a board to inquire into the various designs proposed for armored ships. The Union Navy advertised for proposals for ironclad steam vessels of war on 7 August, and Welles appointed 3 senior officers as the ironclad board the following day. Their task was to examine plans for the completion of ironclad vessels and consider its costs. Erickson originally made no submission to the board, but became involved when Cornelius Bushnell, the sponsor of the proposal that became the armored sloop Galena, needed to have his design reviewed by a naval constructor. The board required a guarantee from Bushnell that his ship would float despite the weight of its armor, and Cornelius H. Delamater of New York City recommended that Bushnell consult with his friend Erickson. The two first met on the 9th of September and again on the following day after Erickson had time to evaluate Galena's design. During this second meeting, Erickson showed Bushnell a model of his own design, the future Monitor, derived from his 1854 design. Bushnell got Erickson's permission to show the model to Welles, who told Bushnell to show it to the board. Upon review of Erickson's unusual design, the board was skeptical, concerned that such a vessel would not float, especially in rough seas, and rejected the proposal of a completely iron-laden ship. President Lincoln, who had also examined the design, overruled them. Erickson assured the board his ship would float, exclaiming, "The sea shall ride over her and she shall live in it like a duck." On the 15th of September, after further deliberations, the board accepted Erickson's proposal. The ironclad board evaluated 17 different designs, but recommended only 3 for procurement on the 16th of September, including Erickson's Monitor design. The 3 ironclad ships selected differed substantially in design and degree of risk. Monitor was the most innovative design by virtue of its low freeboard, shallow draft iron hull, and total dependence on steam power. The riskiest element of its design was its rotating gun turret, something that had not previously been tested by any navy. Ericsson's guarantee of delivery in 100 days proved to be decisive in choosing his design despite the risk involved. Design and description. Monitor was an unusual vessel in almost every respect and was sometimes sarcastically described by the press and other critics as Ericsson's folly, cheese box on a raft, and the janky cheese box. The most prominent feature on the vessel was a large cylindrical gun turret mounted amidships above the low freeboard upper hull, also called the raft. This extended well past the sides of the lower, more traditionally shaped hull. A small armored pilot house was fitted on the upper deck towards the bow. However, its position prevented Monitor from firing her guns straight forward. One of Ericsson's prime goals in designing the ship was to present the smallest possible target to enemy gunfire. The ship was 179 feet long overall, had a beam of 41 feet 6 inches and had a maximum draft of 10 feet 6 inches. Monitor had a tonnage of 776 tons burden and displaced 987 long tons. Her crew consisted of 49 officers and enlisted men. The ship was powered by a single-cylinder horizontal vibrating lever steam engine, also designed by Ericsson, which drove a 9-foot propeller, whose shaft was 9 inches in diameter. The engine used steam generated by 2 horizontal fire tube boilers at a maximum pressure of 40 psi. The 320 indicated horsepower engine was designed to give the ship a top speed of 8 knots, but Monitor was 1 to 2 knots slower in service. The engine had a bore of 36 inches and a stroke of 22 inches. The ship carried 100 long tons of coal. Ventilation for the vessel was supplied by 2 centrifugal blowers near the stern, each of which was powered by a 6-horsepower steam engine. One fan circulated air throughout the ship, but the other one forced air through the boilers, which depended on this forced draft. Leather belts connected the blowers to their engines and they would stretch when wet, often disabling the fans and boilers. The ship's pumps were steam-operated and water would accumulate in the ship if the pumps could not get enough steam to work. Monitor's turret measured 20 feet in diameter and 9 feet high, constructed with 8 inches of armor rendering the overall vessel somewhat top-heavy. Its rounded shape helped to deflect cannon shot. A pair of donkey engines rotated the turret through a set of gears. A full rotation was made in 22.5 seconds during testing on the 9th of February 1862. Fine control of the turret proved to be difficult as the engine would have to be placed in reverse if the turret overshot its mark or another full rotation could be made. The only way to see out of the turret was through the gun ports when the guns were not in use, or withdrawn for reloading during battle. Heavy iron port stoppers would swing down into place to close the gun ports, including the guns. The turret weighed approximately 160 long tons. The entire weight rested on an iron spindle that had to be jacked up using a wedge before the turret could rotate. The spindle was 9 inches in diameter, which gave it 10 times the strength needed in preventing the turret from sliding sideways. When not in use, the turret rested on a brass ring on the deck that was intended to form a watertight seal. In service, however, this proved to leak heavily, despite caulking by the crew. The gap between the turret and the deck proved to be a problem as debris and shell fragments entered the gap and jammed the turrets of several Passat-class monitors, which used the same turret design. During the First Battle of Charleston Harbor in April 1863, Direct hits at the turret with heavy shot also had the potential to bend the spindle, which could also jam the turret. To gain access to the turret from below or to hoist up powder and shot during battle, the turret had to rotate facing directly to starboard, which would line up the entry hatch in the floor of the turret with an opening in the deck below. The roof of the turret was lightly built to facilitate any needed exchange of the ship's guns and to improve ventilation, with only gravity holding the roof plates in place. The turret was intended to mount a pair of 15-inch smoothbore Dahlgren guns, but they were not ready in time and 11-inch guns were substituted. Each gun weighed approximately 16,000 pounds. Monitor's guns used the standard propellant charge of 15 pounds specified by the 1860 Ordnance for targets distant, near, and ordinary, established by the gun's designer Dahlgren himself. They could fire a 136-pound round-shot shell up to a range of 3,650 yards at an elevation of plus 15 degrees. The top of the armored deck was only about 18 inches above the waterline. It was protected by 2 layers of 1/2-inch wrought iron armor. The sides of the raft consisted of 3 to 5 layers of 1-inch iron plates, backed by about 30 inches of pine and oak. 3 of the plates extended the full 60-inch height of the side, but the 2 innermost plates did not extend all the way down. Ericsson originally intended to use either 6 1-inch plates or a single outer 4-inch plate backed by 3 3/4-inch plates, but the thicker plate required too much time to roll. The 2 innermost plates were riveted together while the outer plates were bolted to the inner ones. A 9th plate, only 3/4-inch thick and 15 inches wide, was bolted over the butt joints of the innermost layer of armor. Glass portholes in the deck provided natural light for the interior of the ship in action. These were covered by iron plates. After the duel between the 2 ironclads at Hampton Roads, there was concern by some Navy officials who witnessed the battle that Monitor's design might allow for easy boarding by the Confederates. In a letter dated the 27th of April 1862, Lieutenant Commander O. C. Badger wrote to Lieutenant H. A. Wise, Assistant Inspector of Ordnance, advising the use of liquid fire, scalding water from the boiler through hoses and pipes, sprayed out via the vents and pilot house window, to repel enemy boarders. Wise, who was aboard and inspected Monitor after the battle, responded in a letter of the 30th of April 1862, with reference to the Monitor: "The moment I jumped on board of her after the fight, I saw that a steam tug with 20 men could have taken the upper part of her in as many seconds. I hear that hot water pipes are arranged so as to scald the assailants when they may dare to set foot on her. The chance to employ such a tactic never arose." There are conflicting accounts as to whether such an anti-personnel provision was installed. Construction. Commodore Joseph Smith, chief of the Bureau of Yards and Docks, sent Ericsson formal notice of the acceptance of his proposal on the 21st of September 1861. 6 days later, Ericsson signed a contract with Bushnell, John F. Winslow and John A. Griswold, which stated that the 4 partners would equally share in the profits of the losses incurred by the construction of the ironclad. There was one major delay, however, over the signing of the actual contract with the government. Wells insisted that if Monitor didn't prove to be a complete success, the builders would have to refund every cent to the government. Winslow balked at this draconian provision and had to be persuaded by his partners to sign after the Navy rejected his attempt to amend the contract. The contract was finally signed on the 4th of October for a price of $275,000 to be paid in installments as work progressed. Preliminary work had begun well before the date, however, and Ericsson's consortium contracted with Thomas R. Rowland of the Continental Iron Works at Greenpoint, Brooklyn on the 25th of October for construction of Monitor's hull, with her keel being laid on that same day. The turret was built and assembled at the Novelty Iron Works in Manhattan, disassembled and shipped to Greenpoint where it was reassembled. The ship's steam engines and machinery were constructed at the Delamater Iron Works, also in Manhattan. Chief Engineer Auburn C. Stymers, who once served aboard Merrimack, was appointed superintendent of the ship while she was undergoing construction. Although never formally assigned to the crew, he remained aboard her as an inspector during her maiden voyage and battle. Construction progressed in fits and starts, plagued by a number of short delays in the delivery of iron and occasional shortages of cash, but they did not significantly delay the ship's progress by more than a few weeks. The 100 days allotted for her construction passed on the 12th of January, but the Navy chose not to penalize the consortium. The name Monitor, meaning one who admonishes and corrects wrongdoers, was proposed by Ericsson on the 20th of January 1862 and approved by Assistant Secretary of the Navy Gustavus Fox, while Ericsson stood on its deck in defiance of all his critics who thought she would never float. Monitor was launched on the 30th of January 1862 to the cheers of the watching crowd, even those who had bet that the ship would sink straight to the bottom, and commissioned on the 25th of February. Even before Monitor was commissioned, she ran an unsuccessful set of sea trials on the 19th of February. Valve problems with the main engine and one of the fan engines prevented her from reaching the Brooklyn Navy Yard from Greenpoint, and she had to be towed to the next day. These issues were easily fixed, and Monitor was ordered to sail for Hampton Roads on the 26th of February, but her departure had to be delayed one day to load ammunition. On the morning of the 27th of February, the ship entered the East River preparatory to leaving New York, but proved to be all but unsteerable and had to be towed back to the Navy Yard. Upon examination, the steering gear controlling the rudder had been improperly installed, and Rowland offered to realign the rudder, which he estimated to take only a day. Ericsson, however, preferred to revise the steering gear by adding an extra set of pulleys as he believed it would take less time. His modification proved to be successful during trials on the 4th of March. Gunnery trials were successfully performed the previous day, although Stymers twice nearly caused disasters as he did not understand how the recoil mechanism worked on Ericsson's carriage for the 11-inch guns. Instead of tightening them to reduce the recoil upon firing, he loosened them so that both guns struck the back of the turret, fortunately without hurting anybody or damaging the guns. Ericsson's revolutionary turret, although not without flaws, was a unique concept in gun mounting that was soon adapted and used on naval ships around the world. His Monitor design employed over 40 patented inventions and was completely different from any other naval warship at the time, because Monitor was an experimental craft, urgently needed, hurriedly constructed, and almost immediately put to sea. A number of problems were discovered during her maiden voyage to Hampton Roads and during the battle there. Yet Monitor was still able to challenge Virginia and prevent her from further destroying the remaining ships in the Union flotilla blockading Hampton Roads. During the boom time of the Civil War, Ericsson could have made a fortune with his inventions used in Monitor, but instead gave the government all his Monitor patent rights, saying it was his contribution to the glorious Union cause. Crew. Monitor's crew were all volunteers and totaled 49 officers and enlisted men, as the warship required 10 officers, a commander, an executive officer, 4 engineers, 1 medical officer, 2 masters and a paymaster. Before Worden was allowed to select, assemble, and commit a crew to Monitor, the vessel had to be completed. The original officers at the time of Monitor's commissioning were 4 of the officers were of the line and responsible for the handling of the vessel and operation of guns during battle, while the engineering officers were considered a class unto themselves. In Monitor's turret, Green and Stoddard supervised loading and firing of the 2 11-inch Dahlgrens. Each gun was crewed by 8 men. Thus, during battle, at least 18 men were present in the turret. In Worden's report of the 27th of January 1862 to Wells, he stated he believed 17 men and 2 officers would be the maximum number in the turret that allowed the crew to work without getting in each other's way. Monitor also required petty officers. Among them was Daniel Toffee, Worden's nephew. Worden had selected Toffee to serve as his captain's clerk. 2 black Americans were also among the enlisted men in the crew. During Monitor's service, commanders and several officers were replaced because of injuries or for other reasons. Living quarters for the senior officers consisted of 8 separate well-furnished cabins, each provided with a small oak table and chair, an oil lamp, shelves and drawers, and a canvas floor covering covered with a rug. The entire crew were given goatskin mats to sleep on. Lighting for each living area was provided by small skylights in the deck above, which were covered by an iron hatch during battle. The officers' wardroom was located forward of the berth deck, where officers would eat the meals, hold meetings or socialize during what little spare time they had. It was well furnished with an oriental rug, a large oak table and other such items. Erickson had personally paid for the costs of all the officers' furnishings. Many details of Monitor's history and insights of everyday crew life have been discovered from correspondence sent from the various crew members to family and friends while serving aboard the ironclad. In particular, the correspondence of George S. Gear, who sent more than 80 letters, often referred to as the Monitor Chronicles, to his wife Martha during the entire time of Monitor's service, provide many details and insights into every chapter of the ironclad's short-lived history, offering a rare perspective of a sailor's experience on the naval front during the Civil War. The letters of Acting Paymaster William F. Keeler to his wife Anna also corroborate many of the accounts of affairs that took place aboard the Monitor. The letters of Gear and Keeler are available for viewing and are housed at the Mariners Museum in Virginia. Other crew members were interviewed later in life, like Louis Stoddard, who was one of the last crew members to abandon Monitor minutes before she sank in a storm at sea, was the last surviving crew member of Monitor and lived well into the 20th century.